Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Lives with Mastery, and I'm excited to have Daniel Layfield, who's the Director of Product Management at Diligent, and he's the founder of the blog Subscription Index, where he advises subscription businesses on monetization. He was earlier working at Code Academy, where he led growth and helped 5x revenue to a successful exit. Daniel specializes in pricing strategy, churn reduction, and LTV optimization across consumer and B2B SaaS companies. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Yeah, Rohit, great to be here. Excited to be here. Thanks for including me.
Awesome. So, you've had an interesting journey, but before we talk about, how did you get your start? I was interested to understand, how did you get your start in this crazy world of startups? How did you go about building your own company? And what led you to this world of monetization?
Yeah, great question. So I started my career in management consulting and finance. So I left school in 2007 and was like right in the middle of the financial crisis in the US. I ended up joining a really tiny consulting firm that focused on kind of back office optimization of banks. Did that for 4 years. Then I was at Booz Allen Hamilton for 2 years doing pretty much the same work. Then I was at JP Morgan for 2 years doing quantitative risk. And kind of didn't really see a future for myself in that world. I found banks super duper boring. I was probably a terrible bank employee. I loved having my headphones on and working on Excel models all day. But once I started to get kind of pulled into the bureaucracy of the bank, my interest in that waned pretty hard. I ended up leaving there and starting an ad tech startup, which didn't end up working. I learned a ton about startups. But it was the first time I really realized when you go to start a company, you need so many different skills. You really just don't learn as a corporate employee at all. So got that off the ground, didn't work at all. And then I got fortunate that I got brought to a company called Code Academy. So Code Academy, this is probably 2015-ish. It's the middle of the kind of learn to code wave. So I initially got hired as a temporary employee, literally making $15 an hour writing FAQ articles. But I guess I did well enough at that. That got brought in to do kind of an operations job, which really meant do anything. Code Academy had a ton of traffic at that time, but really didn't understand how to build the business side of the house. So I did everything under the sun, from kind of working with the content team to doing our GDPR compliance to running our executive meetings to negotiating partnerships. Code Academy only had 20 people, so I was kind of generally useful business guy. But around that time, I realized I probably needed to pick one of the disciplines within startup, because kind of no one hires just kind of generally smart person. You get hired into kind of like a specific job. So around that time, I actually got very fortunate that one of my favorite bosses at all time, a guy called Yuquan Lin, who was our VP of product at Code Academy, who's my boss again at Diligent now, just kind of thought I would be a good product person. I think at that time, I didn't even know what product management was. I think the product management industry is, I guess, more on the minds of people now. But back then, I may have never heard the term before. So I got super fortunate that he just kind of tapped me on the shoulder and thought I had potential in this area. And then I took over the growth team at Code Academy. And that was my first real frontline startup job.
Super, super interesting. And you talked about Code Academy, where you helped revenue go 5 times. But what percentage of that growth came from acquiring new customers versus better monetizing existing ones through pricing or retention?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say it was mostly the latter. So Code Academy had tons of traffic at this time. So Code Academy came out of Y Combinator in 2011 and is really like the dominant learn to code product at the time. The industry hadn't really yet fractured into boot camps and specialized courses and tons of free YouTube content. So if you were trying to learn to program in 2015, Code Academy was the place to go. I think we were the number one SEO result if you Googled learn to code. We were number 2 for Python. We were maybe number 3 for HTML. So we had tons and tons and tons of traffic. We were just really, really bad at converting it. So I think initially when we started the growth team, we read the book Hacking Growth. We kind of tried to implement a growth process, but really found ourselves way too scattered across tons and tons of different levers. So I think the fundamental knowledge in Hacking Growth is excellent, but we struggled to apply it. And I think everything changed when we just got more focused and we figured out what the levers really were.
Right, and you went from Code Academy to Uber Eats to now Diligent. So, how does subscription monetization strategy change when you go from consumer education to B2B governance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wouldn't say that we use a ton of subscription tactics at Diligent. Diligent's really different. It's a big, giant, old school B2B SaaS company. It's a great company. It's super duper successful. We're in the process of making things more kind of productized growth now. But up until now, it's very much been like you sell to boards of directors of the biggest companies in the world, and you sell through sales teams. I think we're in the process of moving more towards like a productized growth model now. But really, I find every business has its kind of like levers. And subscriptions, the levers are really kind of like how you do purchase awareness, how you do the purchase funnel, how you do onboarding into the paid product, how you keep the habit loop growing, how you do payment processing, and how you mitigate churn. And I think once we like really figured those out at Code Academy, that's when we started to unlock a lot of growth. So to answer your question, previously, most of Code Academy's growth was better converting paid users, keeping them for longer and monetizing them better. And I think because we had such a huge traffic hose, that we could stack kind of incremental wins in the right area. And I think we probably took revenue from 10 million to 50 million in probably 3 years, 4 years. Like my memory's getting a little fuzzy. But we had kind of like a big growth and we got it to a great exit.
Right, right. Interesting. And you've also talked about the four horsemen of churn framework. So, what's that framework all about?
Yeah, I think if you run a subscription product, I guess the quote unquote logical way for me of helping to improve monetization is probably first making sure you have product market fit and the product produces enough value that someone wants to use it. Probably then tackling churn, because the more you tackle churn, the higher your LTV goes up and the more money you have to use in acquisition. So to me, the four horsemen of churn are really initially payment processing. So the easiest way of tackling churn, in my opinion, even though it doesn't have a massive value, but the fastest time to market is typically payment processing best practices. So do you retry failed cars? Do you notify people? Do you set up backup payment gateways? Are you using the right gateways in different markets? Typically, those are changes you don't 100% need engineers for, and you can do them in a handful of weeks. And maybe that only drops your churn, call it 5%, 10%, but the ROI on that few week project for a 10% lift in churn, which is a 10% lift in LTV, is huge. I'd say after that, it's really making sure like you're onboarding people into the right habits early enough. So the best way of tackling churn is high in the activation funnel. Because once people are kind of fading away and have a negative opinion of your product, it's really, really hard to win them back. So typically you fight churn as high in the process as you can. I'd say after that is understanding the persona that you're selling to and making sure that you aren't selling to the wrong people. It's kind of like a dirty secret, not a dirty secret, but a secret of the private equity industry is once they buy a company, they get much, much better at understanding the ROI of the dollars they put into companies. When you're in a startup and you're in kind of that like early exploration phase, it's much, much easier to just kind of almost like scatter shot your work across a bunch of areas of the product and not be super, super deliberate in what you're focusing on. So I think the advice I normally give startups here is first like have an understanding of what your user personas are. If you've been doing this for a long enough time, you can probably guess. So at Code Academy, we had the rough buckets of personas of kind of students, hobbyists, so people who didn't really have to learn to code but liked it. What we called career upskillers, so people who are moving from kind of like being an Excel-based analyst to a Python-based analyst, and engineers. With time, we learned that like number 3, the upskillers were our best persona. We still weren't super deliberate about this. But if you're going to build a product, there's typically one persona that you are the best for. And you should focus definitely all of your paid acquisition efforts on that, but kind of also your product development efforts on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And out of all the four horsemen that you talked about, what's the one horseman where the most subscription companies completely misdiagnose, thinking that it's a product problem, when it could be something else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's the persona one. So to complete the 4, so the 4th one is what I'd call happy user churn. So like you sell a limited use case. And after the use case is over, people kind of run out of things to do and they churn happily. To me, I still think it's lack of focus on the right persona is the number one thing that startups are blind to. So the simplest way of tackling this is, collect some level of persona data on onboarding. So typically this is an onboarding quiz. Like, are you here to do X, Y, or Z? Is your background like 1, 2, or 3? You then want to make that data available kind of like everywhere you look at numbers in your business. So mostly that's useful to me if you look at like retention or conversion. So if you kind of chart out your personas, you'll have one that retains the best. You'll have one that monetizes the best. Those are likely the same thing. And then you want to make sure like there's a strong enough feedback from that information back to the acquisition systems. And also like when you build product and you make major investments in things, you should really target that first primary persona.
Got it. So what you're saying is the one who retains and monetizes the most is the ideal ICP on which you should focus more on?
Very likely. And the other thing to keep in mind here is the volume of them. So if, your best retaining persona is only 2% of your user base, that might be a little different. But it also might be an indicator that maybe you should focus more in that area. But to me, I don't think I see enough startups have a great understanding of like who's in their user base, who really gets the best value from the product, and then who you should be building for. If you like way oversimplify this problem and say that you sell a product that digs holes, like holes are of different values to like a 6-year-old on a beach and like an oil drilling company. Like even if you might fundamentally do the same thing, the hole has to work and be of different sizes, and one persona gets a wildly different amount of value from it than the other.
Got it. And you've also written about the hidden math of churn creating a hard ceiling at $1 million. So, especially when it comes to a churn rate, how does having churn double your maximum possible user base? And, what churn rate makes $1 million impossible?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the things we didn't understand well enough at Code Academy is how to understand your churn rates and understand what that does across your business. So subscription businesses are like very math driven. You tend to work in pretty reliable cohorts, and you have the ability to make and measure changes in kind of like a typically big audience size and kind of like hopefully predictable model. So to me, the number one thing to understand about churn is that if you take 1 and divide by your percentage churn rate, you get your average months of retention. So if your churn rate is 20%, 1 divided by 0.2 is 5. So you end up in a very, very simple way of understanding your churn rates, and also being able to do kind of back of the napkin math on what impacts will be. Additionally, if you kind of like take that logic forward, so if you take your monthly price and you divide it by your monthly churn rate, you also get your LTV. So you see that churn has a massive impact on like really, really important numbers of the business. To me, something we didn't know at Code Academy, but probably would have like changed my math on how we did a lot of products, is if you think of what's happening within a subscription business, you have tons of cohorts kind of moving down a curve at the same time. Because those cohorts like sum up to be your total audience size, your total user base, and your total user base drives your top level MRR. You can also calculate like the ceiling that you can't get over with certain churn numbers. So this is a concept that we didn't know that was mind-blowing to me when I first read it. But you can calculate the ceiling of subscribers and revenue in a subscription business if you take your new monthly users and divide it by your monthly churn rate. So, everyone tells me never to do public math. But if let's say you have 500 users coming in per month and you have a 20% churn rate. You have 2,500 users is kind of the ceiling for your churn number, before which, unless you increase your acquisition numbers or you lower your churn, the business will kind of like plateau at that point. So this actually matches my own experience that when I got to Code Academy, we had a lot of trouble breaking past the 25,000 subscriber threshold, where we just kind of stayed there for a long time. It's because our churn was too high and we weren't doing work to improve the acquisition numbers. We ended up working on both, and we ended up probably 5xing that number, maybe more by the time we left. But really, it's attacking both of them. But typically the easiest place to start is the churn best practices.
Got it. And when it comes to monthly to annual plan pricing trick, so pricing the annual plan at slightly more than average
Yep.
monthly LTV. But at Code Academy, you took a long pause to implement this. So was there internal resistance to do it? And when is the right time for somebody to implement this sort of a pricing trick?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is like one of the most powerful things we learned at Code Academy, and two, it works in a very specific kind of subscription business. So a good chunk of subscription businesses, actually, let me back up a step. The number one driver of your churn and retention in subscription is the use case that you tackle. So I live in Central Texas. We pay a company to come pick up our garbage because the town doesn't do that. Unless that trash company wildly screws up trash collection. Like, I'm going to subscribe to this for as long as I live in this house because I need trash picked up every week. Right. Contrast that with like the shorter term use cases that are kind of temporary habits and hobbies. So fitness, dating, education, these are things that people tend to do for under a year. Code Academy is in that ed tech bucket where the average retention was like well under a year when we got there. So if you are in a subscription business that has retention under a year safely, this pricing trick is really, really effective. I would suggest A/B testing it, but I'll walk you through the logic of it. So probably, I'm blanking on the years, but let's say, for sake of examples, our average retention was like 4 to 5 months. We ran an A/B test where we discounted the annual plan price to be the equivalent of like 6 months of the monthly plan price, and immediately saw probably like 30 to 40% more people switch over to annual plans for the savings. So if you price the annual plan as like slightly more than the monthly retention cycle, typically you pull a bunch of people over to the annual plan, which has a massive impact on LTV. You cut the payment processing risk dramatically. So instead of charging a card 12 times, you charge it 1 time. You collect more cash up front. A good chunk of those annual plans end up renewing for the next year. So you might end up like increasing LTV 60% for a relatively simple test. I can talk about how to run pricing tests like that. Most of the companies, though, that I've seen do this, it works. I'd say the one exception is products that are really, really expensive. So this works in the kind of consumer threshold that are like somewhat around impulse purchases. So in the US, that would be kind of like $10 a month to maybe $50 a month. If this thing is $500 a month, that's a big enough purchasing decision that I don't think people switch purely for the savings.
Got it. And Daniel, before the call, we were talking about, how salespeople would go about changing the pricing. So you had to, custom change the pricing. But with AI coming in, now you have usage-based pricing and hybrid pricing. Where does the future of SaaS or seat-based pricing go, where you're seeing so much of change happening in the pricing world?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the B2B pricing side is like less my wheelhouse. The dynamics that I've seen that companies need to think through in this area is like usage-based pricing is great from the business's perspective because there's a really close tie between the value the user gets and what you end up charging the user. It's probably also the easiest to sell because like it in a sense has like a trial built into it. So as users ramp up usage, they can start small and test it. The downside of usage-based pricing that I don't see enough people talk about is it adds friction into people using the product. So it depends what the pricing is, but like the more I have to psychologically think if this product is worth it, it's going to slow down the habit cycles. So I think everybody building SaaS really, really likes the concept of usage-based pricing. It's easier to price for the big enterprise customers. It's easier to get people in the door. The thing you have to be careful though of is like exactly how you design that price table. Is it like a one-to-one credit jump as you move up? Do you get periodic discounts as you move up? Because what you don't want the users doing, especially for high frequency products, is really, really thinking if this usage of the product is worth it, because it's going to hurt and slow down activation.
Got it. So super interesting. And, I wanted to talk about paywall strategy, especially when it comes to, designing features. How do you know if you're building features that should be paywalled versus features that should drive adoption in the free tier and then, moving into paywall strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the kind of North Star for paywall design and monetization is, are the users who get the most value from your product paying you the most or the most likely to pay you? So freemium products are really, or the freemium paywall strategy is a really common one in subscription product design. The thing you have to watch out for is to make sure that like the free product organically leads people into the paid product, and that you don't end up in kind of siloed product strategies. So one way of thinking about that is like, are your most active free users likely or like forced to convert to the paid product at some time? An example that we did at Code Academy that I don't think we did this really well is our top 5 courses were kind of HTML, CSS, Python, Java, JavaScript, etc. Probably 60% of our users were in those big pillar courses at any given time, but there was kind of no reason once you were in those courses to convert to the paid product. We did our paywall strategy mostly on a course level. So you end up with this kind of siloing problem where most of the users are is the poorest converting experience. Another way we could have done that is like make all courses free and charge for the last 50% of them. But we didn't end up doing that. I'm not sure if it was right. The trade-off there is like people come to the product for the big free courses. So the trickiest part of paywalls, especially in freemium products, is like you don't want to kill all the value of the free product and cut off the reason people come. And that type of thing is really, really hard to measure in an A/B test. I think if you think about what features to charge for, a good kind of rule of thumb is like, what are the more advanced problems your best persona has? And like, what could you build on the other side of the paywall to get them there? But I think most paywall optimization, especially for freemium, really comes down to like how often do users bump into the paid products, are aware of them, and what's the likelihood to convert.
Got it. So super interesting, and the subscription managers like the Stripe billing and the Zoras are really expensive, and you've written about when they're worth the money. But what's a revenue threshold that says that now you need to buy a new tool versus you can build it internally?
Yeah, great question. So subscription managers are products like Recurly or ChargeBee or Zora. The real like value of them is it allows you to link multiple payment gateways together. So I'd say the traditional path that I see companies take to getting a subscription manager is they come out of the gate with Stripe. They then realize like the Stripe payment processing, at least a couple years ago, wasn't great in certain areas of the world. So you end up with Braintree or PayPal. And then you have a problem where you have your revenue and your pricing being set in 2 different areas. Stripe has relatively sophisticated dunning and chargeback processes, Braintree less so. So you end up looking to like kind of join them somehow with what I'd call like the brain. So the subscription manager is basically like the brain of the subscription system. I'd say the upsides of subscription managers is you centralize pricing. It makes life easier for your finance team. You centralize coupon codes. You centralize all your win-back processes. The downside is like they're relatively expensive. So I had a client that was probably doing them $2.5 million a year, and I'd say most quotes came back from Recurly and ChargeBee at like 50 to 60 grand. So that probably puts it in the top like 5 most expensive SaaS tools you use. It ends up also being like a relatively, if not complex, like stressful migration process. So all the businesses run on cash flow. You end up repointing where your cash comes from into a new unknown system. Those systems are known to be really, really reliable, but there's also like stresses the shit out of CEOs and product managers when you're going through transitions like this in case you miss something. So I'd say like the threshold that this probably makes sense is probably $2 to $5 million. In the explosion of SaaS tools that's probably coming in the next 2 years, my guess is you might also see cheaper subscription managers come out because they're good, really low churn businesses, and you can probably duplicate a lot of what they're doing because that model's relatively well understood now.
Got it. So super interesting because I want to talk about how AI is impacting the world of PMs and designers, where you see companies like Klarna and even the Airbnb founder saying that we may not need PMs, but will AI wipe out the needs for designers or PMs, or will there be like um, a role where PM and a designer engineer is going to work together in one role and do that job?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll talk to what we see at Diligent. So for people that don't know Diligent's about a 2,000 person, like mid nine figures of revenue SaaS company. Diligent, I'd say every discipline is adopting AI. I'd say we're kind of sophisticated in our AI use. What we don't have yet from AI is a way of taking kind of like prototypes and making them live to customers. So the kind of long pole in project management terminology is still the development cycle. I think it radically like speeds up our ability to prototype, to convey concepts to executives and directors and customers, and like do good complicated research. I think AI is great at taking out like the grunt work across all the disciplines. So as a product manager, we now have an internal tool that I can use to summarize Gong sales calls and get me an answer in like 5 minutes, which it would have taken me sending an intern down this rabbit hole for a week to listen to 50 calls and take notes for me. So that research cycle is much, much, much faster. I think where this goes, I think it shrinks the size of teams likely. Like you probably don't need the same number of people to do things. It probably ends up changing the ratio of PMs to engineers, would be my guess. Because it's more likely that the like choke point of product development becomes like knowing exactly what to do than building it out in the future. Whether it like eliminates any jobs, like I really don't know. I think there will be a big divide between startups that are kind of AI native and are like built for this world, and the older SaaS companies who have big existing code bases that you're not going to be able to fully transition to this world without a ton of work.
Got it. And so do you believe in 10, 20 years from now, we'll have a lot more companies, where people are not going to use, not going to learn code, but use tools like Lovable and Bolt to build new products, but you'll have lesser number of engineers or product managers going forward? Or do you think we'll have more number of engineers because you could build a lot more products in next 10 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're going to have more products being built than ever before. An analogy that I keep going back to is kind of what mass manufacturing did to physical goods. I think AI is going to happen to software. So if I look around my desk, I have like tons of little things like pens and coins and Post-its, where if I needed like a craftsman in my town to hand build these things for me, none of these things would exist. It's way too expensive. I think what AI is going to do to software is going to be very similar. You're going to have better niche products that cover more use cases and are more hyper targeted for people. Like, I don't know if you have kids. I have 2 young kids. Like, there's a never-ending list of specialized tools you can build for a kid that you find on Amazon that solve one specific problem for like 2 months, like sleep, feeding, shoes, walking, teething. Like, I think the same thing will happen to software products, where right now we have a ton of like big dominant players. Big dominant players, especially in consumer, rely on things like network effects or usage rights. I think you'll end up with like smaller niche tools built by people who understand the problems better.
Got it. And I'm super impressed with ChatGPT and the way they're churning out new products. But where does the future product lie, where OpenAI can control the whole stack?
It's a good question. When you say control the whole stack, tell me more.
I mean, when it comes to whole tech stack, which is, they're also competing with the consulting firms. They have, yeah. So, they're going to each and every sector, but do you think, they can control the whole tech stack going forward?
It's a great question. I think what you're probably going to see is similar to what happened when Google took over the internet in the 2000s, where like OpenAI is going to lay the new foundation of kind of how we all use technology. Typically, what you'll see and what you saw with Google is you have like a period of increasing dominance. And then like people find weaknesses or pick off specialized use cases, and you see things splinter off, and overall their dominance wanes. It's almost like, I think Brian Balfour wrote a great article on distribution shifts, Another great distribution shift is like the shift to mobile. It's like once things become mobile first, you see like new dominant players like the app stores come out, and like overall they get very dominant, but eventually that like stranglehold loosens a little bit. I think OpenAI is going to do the same. It will become kind of the new bedrock for most of the technology we use. It doesn't mean there won't be specialized providers like what LexisNexis did during the Google dominance areas. If you end up with like one specific use case that like is not going to fit in the broad use case, but over time everything gets built on top of it until the next technology wave comes. I think I'd encourage everyone to read Brian Balfour's article. It's really, really strong. I think the main takeaway for me from it was really that like you can't fight these distribution shifts. You just kind of have to learn to ride the wave.
Got it. We'll put down the show notes about Brian Balfour articles. And when it comes to subscription-based business models, what's a fundamental weakness that you've seen that makes subscription the wrong business model for certain products?
Yeah, great question. I'd say when I have like talked to startups or worked with companies in the past, the hardest churn rate to fight is like 35%. So 35% churn could mean you're like missing some best practices, and with time we can get that down to 10, or you might be using fundamentally the wrong business model. So if the underlying use case you have doesn't recur, it's really, really tough to build a subscription product. So I see that traditionally in a lot of ed tech products where it's like really short life cycle learning, like a specialized skill set like Google Ads, where this isn't like really an ongoing problem. It's something you want to come in and do and leave. I think at Code Academy, we overcame that largely with like structured curriculum and our library size, where eventually you give people enough time to practice. And you can like help them for long enough that you end up extending the life cycle. I think if you struggle to break below 30% churn with dedicated focus for a long time, you might want to switch the business model, because that means your users will stay around for typically 3 months. And you might have a better time running the business if you just charge them upfront for it. The beauty of the subscription business model is the ongoing cash flows. But it's also the big weakness of it, because the cash flow ends up being spread out. So I heard on a podcast the other day that something like the LTV for a Starbucks user is like $14,000. Now, Starbucks isn't a subscription product, but I bet Starbucks corporate would rather take that money up front. But consumers don't want to pay it, which means it's like a good use case for a recurring use product. But if you end up kind of like in most scenarios, death is in the middle, where like if you end up building a terribly converting subscription product, you have spread out cash flows, a tricky business to operate, and bad enterprise value, because you're seen as like not a great investment. You might end up being a lot more successful charging people up front, which means like you can rely more heavily on paid media because your cash payback cycle is faster.
Got it. Super interesting. And metrics reviews are the secret sauce of great products. So what's the one North Star metric that subscription businesses should track religiously?
It's a great question. I think every business probably has a slightly different North Star metric. The ability to set North Star metrics when we interview product managers is one of the things we interview for, like very much at the beginning. North Star metrics, the traditional definition is like some overlap between the business value and the user value of a product. So a good example for Facebook is probably like time on the product, because it's an ads-driven business. The more time you're on the product, the more ads you see. And for users, it means you're getting value from the product. I think when I was at Uber Eats, like a good North Star metric is probably like orders delivered. You want users to like use the product repeatedly, and also that's how we make our money. So I think every business ends up with a different North Star metric, but I think setting one and getting more specific with time is really, really valuable. You tend to end up with these kind of on like the business level, then either on like the team or feature level. I think anybody setting them, I think I would start broad and get more narrow with time. So on the growth team at Code Academy, initially we started with like number of paid subscribers. And then you realize like there's a lot that drives that. So we end up kind of moving down the metrics tree into conversion rate, because we can't really control the traffic volume, but we can control the conversion rate. And then we got more specific with time at looking at the conversion rate within a time box. So I think we looked at like 21-day conversion rate for new users. And then you look at like month one churn numbers. So you end up kind of in like a big conceptual area, like narrowing it down with time. I think when you think about metrics reviews, so metrics reviews are for product teams every 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, monthly, et cetera, going into a meeting with your leadership and attempting to explain how your North Star metric moves. So if you think of a North Star metric as something like, volume of something, if you build a decision tree and move kind of like 2 or 3 layers down of what drives that top star metric, you should get to a sense of how you move the top level numbers. And then hopefully if you look at your roadmap, you're shipping projects that move drivers of the upstream metric. So a metrics review is both like attempting to explain how the top level number moves and also like looking at your past launches to see if you were right about what moves things. Similar to kind of how fitness tests work in sports. If we were on a sports team and I told you had to run a 6-minute mile in 6 months, most of the value is you preparing for that test, not what you actually do on the test. So if you train for 6 months and you miss it by 3 seconds, it's probably fine. The whole point was to get you in better shape. The whole point of metrics reviews is that the PMs building the features understand what drives the important numbers. Because the next time they go to build a feature, they'll be more informed about exactly how to design that feature to actually move the business. It tends to be more of a consumer business practice because there's more of a direct link between features getting shipped and how your numbers move because your customers aren't on long contracts. But I still think it's valuable regardless.
Got it. And Dan, I've used products like YouTube and Netflix, both in UK and India, and the pricing is totally different, But localized pricing can be a massive revenue unlock, but it is also very complex, So how do you get to decide which countries to be prioritized for price localization, and how do you calculate that ROI calculation when you're building a subscription-based business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think price localization, which is basically charging a different value per country or region for your users, I've seen that unlock revenue everywhere I've ever seen it implemented. The downside is that it introduces a lot of organizational complexity. So if you just have one price you charge across the world, it's simple for your finance team, your customer service email templates all use one number, your lifecycle emails all use one number. It becomes very easy to project the business. All your ad systems use one number. Breaking those apart into regions or tiers, again, like unlocks revenue, but I'd say it's kind of like a mid-stage growth metric. I'm gonna guess, my memory's a little blurry here, but we probably did that at Code Academy at maybe like the 15 million number. I could be off in either direction. The way we did it is we ended up cutting the world into kind of like tiers. So if we took every country in the world, we bucketed it into 5 tiers. We ended up like raising the price in the top 2 tiers, lowering the price in the second and third tier, and leaving the 5th tier alone. I would introduce as little complexity as you possibly can and do this kind of gradually. So I'd say the rough steps of internationalizing are changing the value the user sees on the page and changing the currency the user sees on the page and not changing the value. So if you're in Australia, you'd see Australian dollars converted with the FX rate, but you're still charging the user in US dollars. After that is changing the payment processing gateways behind the scenes, so actually charge users in their currency and they don't get hit with an FX charge. I'd say after that is actually changing the value of the product. So making sure that someone in a lower GDP country pays a smaller amount than someone in a higher GDP country. I'd probably say the highest ROI is raising prices in the higher GDP countries first, then lowering. I think lowering allows you to work into markets that you've been traditionally seen as too expensive for, but that word of mouth takes a while to catch up. So let's take India for an example. If you cut your price 80% in India, the following day you don't get 80% more people showing up to buy the product. It takes a while for it to catch up, and there's probably other things you have to do. I think there's a lot of indexes people have used. To me, the most accurate index to kind of level prices in a country is the relative earning power of your target personas. So I've seen people use the Whopper index, like what does a McDonald's sandwich cost in that country?
True.
I think it depends more on who you're selling to. So if you're selling to developers in Argentina, kind of like what's the relative gap in earning power that they have versus the United States or wherever you're based. And this is a place I'd especially keep it simple. Like don't set custom prices per country unless you're like the size of Netflix.
Got it. And how does AI change the subscription monetization playbook when the cost structure and the value deliverability is fundamentally different?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you think of the big buckets of things startups do, it's like you build a product that creates value. You like monetize that value somehow, and then you distribute the product. And you can think of that as kind of like a loop. So it's like you build value, you charge for it, you use the money you get to find new users, they come back to find the value, etc. I think what AI does is probably allows you to move each of those parts a little faster and customize easier. So my guess is like you have the ability to implement more bespoke solutions for people at all stages of those. I think the thing I would caution startups for, and this, I feel like this is the fourth time I'm saying this, but it's like complexity. Like complexity introduces a tax in your system that you pay every single time you touch something. So if we go back to the internationalized pricing example, like every year you do financial forecasting going forward, you have to deal with that complexity. Every time you pay taxes, you have to deal with that complexity. So it probably like 2 or 3x is the cost of those things, which means it 2 or 3x is the number of people you need on those teams or the tools they need for efficiency. So I think AI will probably introduce a lot of like ability to make things feel special for users. But I don't know, maybe I've just been in the startup game for too long, but like you have to keep an eye on the maintenance costs and observability of those problems. If not, they spiral out of control and your velocity grinds to a halt. The number one thing that I've seen that separates good startups from bad startups is speed. Like to me, there's no argument. Like the faster you can move, the better you're going to be.
True.
And you should seriously consider not doing anything that slows you down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Daniel, you got a young family, you got a full-time job, but you also write a great newsletter, which is Subscription Index. What's your writing cadence, and how do you go about building that sort of writing cadence, which allows you to build content as well as consult other companies?
Yeah, I'd say it's really like a passion project for me at this stage. So like
Right.
when I left Code Academy, we struggled with so many aspects of growing that company. So there's many sleepless nights, many hours staring at dashboards to see a line not move, many times feeling behind on OKRs, or we just don't have the direction that we feel like we need to move it. So obviously it was successful. The company sold for over $500 million. I wanted to kind of like write down everything I learned in that process to pass this on to kind of the next generation. So mostly the Subscription Index right now is just a blog. I'm not doing a ton of active consulting. Kind of literally everything I know about how to grow businesses goes on that blog. I'm trying to publish kind of every other month. There's maybe 40 articles on there of basically everything I've seen to be effective in growing subscription products. I'm in the process of writing a playbook, which will be on the site soon. So like if you want a super condensed list of exactly what I would do if I entered a new company, click the link in the header, it'll say playbook. It'll be kind of probably a 5 to 10 email series on exactly the highest ROI things that I've seen to move companies.
Got it. No, absolutely. We could put that playbook in the show notes. And Daniel, I quickly want to do the top 3. What's your favorite business book?
It's not a traditional business book, but one of my favorite books is a book called Boyd, which is a book on John Boyd, who's a fighter pilot in the U.S. He was a fighter pilot, I think, during the maybe Korean and Vietnamese wars, but really he's much more famous for inventing the OODA loop. So the OODA loop is like a foundation of business strategy. So what made John Boyd unique is that he was himself like a great individual fighter pilot, but he also then got a master's in physics and was able to like distill into equations what made planes dominant in certain areas. And that's like very much influenced my desire to write things down. That like we were successful at Code Academy, but like I couldn't really articulate why. And through writing, I'm trying to get better at describing like what makes things work in subscription products and what doesn't.
Correct. We'll put that. No, absolutely. We'll put that in show notes. And Daniel, if you could go back in time when you started your journey in product management, what is the one thing you would have done or done anything differently?
Yeah, I think what makes product management kind of unique and is like a little better now is that it's really like an apprenticeship job. So there's much more being written now about product management than ever was before. But I think what I would have done differently is like find more mentors to learn from. I was like very fortunate to have really good mentors at my company. I mentioned Yukon before. I joined a first round product program that put me in touch with a bunch of senior people in the industry. But really, like product, you need to learn from someone who's been there before. I always equate it to kind of like quarterbacking a football team in the US, where like reading books about it really doesn't teach you what it's like. It's an experience you have to go through. You have to be there in the right environments and have the right people teaching you. Because if you pick the greatest product managers in the world, they've maybe written down 1% of their knowledge. And even then, so much of it's situational.
Yeah.
To me, that's the way to learn it.
Got it. Super interesting. And do you have any favorite online tool, for example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom, ChatGPT?
I think my go-to tool right now is Notion. So I think Notion I've loved as a product for a long time, and I think how they're leaning into their AI strategy is really interesting. So forever they were kind of a, I don't know, web 2.0 product of kind of you have pages and you have databases and you customize them and link them together. But I think what you're watching them do with AI, I think is going to be one of the playbooks going forward for AI products, where they introduce an LLM into the product itself, and now they're building kind of like, you almost think of like as nodes or context collectors. They built a calendar, they built a mail tool, they built a meeting recorder. So they're clearly running a playbook where like you suck all the context about someone into a universe, and then the LLM in that universe gets so helpful and useful that you'll never leave.
Got it. Absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes. And Daniel, what's the best way people can reach out to you and know more about you and Subscription Index?
Yeah, it's subscriptionindex.com. I think there's a contact form on there. It's subscription like the word subscription and index like a stock index. I pretty much everything I know gets written there, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
No, absolutely. We'll put down in the show notes. Daniel, thank you so much for taking on time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.